Daily newspaper journalists, the job is entirely different to anyone else's. With everyone else, you get a curve which goes up. You get in the morning, you have your tea, then you work hard, you about your peak about 1 or 2 in the afternoon, then you tail off nicely to a nice peaceful end where you go off to the pub. The journalist, it starts there and gets worse all the way up. It's a straight line. Your biggest tension is, what time is it now? About now, 1 minute before deadline while I'm talking to you, which is probably the wrong thing to be doing.
Yeah, the front can go.
Right, I better get them sent. About 3. The daily drama of newspaper production is not exclusive to us. It's the same in every newspaper. It's more difficult for us in some senses because we don't have the resources. We have a very small staff. We have, 24, 25 people in the newsroom, as distinct from several hundred in most newsrooms. Because we can't afford multi-site printing across the UK, means that everything goes out from our printers in Rainham in Essex, which means that it goes by road. So we're vulnerable to the weather, we're vulnerable to road accidents. Nevertheless, it's a drama which has its pluses. There's nothing more satisfying than actually seeing the paper the next morning and seeing it saying something which no other newspaper will be saying and putting a case which no other newspaper puts.
Morning Star.
The Daily Worker was born on the 1st of January 1930 under founding editor William Rust. As the organ of the Communist Party, it agitated for a Soviet Britain. Not surprisingly, Britain's ruling class tried to strangle the baby in its cradle. Yet the Daily Worker lives on today as the Morning Star, owned by a people's cooperative and still fighting for peace and socialism.
The press is, in the hands of very few people and very few big business, money-grabbing organisations, and the Morning Star is not like that.
I think the Morning Star has never been about just making money. It's about informing our readers how to make the world into a better place.
The daily papers used to have industrial correspondents. Not one daily newspaper now has an industrial correspondent other than the Morning Star.
The Morning Star is unique, not only in Britain but actually across the world. It's the only daily English language socialist newspaper.
It's the only newspaper which speaks for the left, which speaks for working people, and is unashamedly on their side. It's a very small newspaper with a very large task.
Get your Morning Star, thank you very much, comrade.
Thank you.
Yeah, you take care.
News desk. Not our sort of story, I'm afraid. Yeah, we're the Morning Star, not the Daily Star. Cheers, mate. Bye.
As a High Court judge once remarked, only a moron in a hurry would not be able to tell the difference between the Morning Star and the Daily Star. The Morning Star is proud to be different. It's not owned by multi-millionaires or big business, but by a cooperative of its readers and supporters. Its content reflects the concerns, interest and aspiration of the working class and people generally. But to paraphrase Karl Marx, the paper doesn't just interpret the world. The Morning Star wants to help change it, fundamentally.
It stands up well in comparison, I think, to any other newspaper, any other daily newspaper of the right or the commercial press. The Morning Star and the Daily Worker prior to it were exemplary for their time. The awards are over there on the wall. You can see them for the Daily Worker.
From the outset, the Daily Worker campaigned against ruling class power and privilege. As a result, the paper was boycotted by wholesalers, its offices raided by police, and its staff frequently arrested and imprisoned. It stood shoulder to shoulder with the national unemployed workers' movement in battles against mass unemployment and slum landlords. Alone among the national press, the Daily Worker cheered on the hunger marchers.
The coronation of the people, this is in 1937, when the paper said, well, what is all this pomp and circumstance about? When the people haven't got enough. This was in the height of the Depression. And looking at the old headlines of the Daily Worker, which I've got a lot here, you can see how things haven't really changed between the 30s and the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. The message is always the same. It's the poor that takes the pain, and it's the rich that gets the pleasure.
In the Great Slump, the Daily Worker urged workers to fight not only for their immediate demands, but for an end to capitalism. In Britain, some aristocrats and military chiefs turned to Sir Oswald Mosley and the fascists as a way out of capitalism's crisis. Harry Pollitt and Phil Peratin and the Daily Worker urged militant opposition to Mosley, while capitalist papers like the Daily Mail cried, "Hurrah for the black shirts." Mass action defeated the fascists in Cable Street in the East End in 1936, the year that General Franco launched the fascist rebellion in Spain. Britain's communists opposed the arms embargo on the democratically elected Spanish government. The Communist International and the Soviet Union appealed for worldwide solidarity. 2,000 volunteers left Britain to join the international and medical brigades and defend Spain's democratic republic. The Daily Worker campaigned for an anti-fascist alliance between Britain, France and the Soviet Union. In Germany, the bankers and industrialists had financed Hitler's rise to power. Britain's Tory government appeased the Nazis. The British ruling class didn't want to fight fascism. They wanted Hitler to invade the Soviet Union instead. Trapped by treaty commitments to Poland, Chamberlain eventually declared war on Germany. It was a phony war until the Luftwaffe blitzed London and other cities. These devastating air raids led the Daily Worker to step up its campaign for deep shelters for the working class. The super-rich were already safe, far beneath the Mayfair and Savoy hotels, in their private bunkers or across the Atlantic. The Daily Worker agitated for a people's government to secure a people's peace. At last, on January the 21st, 1941, Churchill and his Labour Home Secretary went into action.
Shortly after the People's Convention was convened, the Daily Worker was banned, and in the library we have the copies of many of the illegal versions that were printed and distributed in factories and workplaces. Included here are special editions that were printed under mock banner heads. A copy of Soviet Week Special is actually a copy of the illegal Daily Worker. By the following week, it becomes the Scottish Worker.
The ban on the paper was not lifted until August 1942. In June 1941, Nazi Germany attacked the Soviet Union. The left in Britain called for a military front against Hitler in Western Europe. This was now clearly a people's war against fascism.
At that time, there were several editions a day. So you can see that's a late extra edition. Red flag is hoisted on the Reichstag. May the 8th. Victory in Europe. Unconditional surrender.
Despite Churchill's Gestapo smears, Labour won the 1945 general election with a landslide. Its election manifesto pledged sweeping nationalisation, full employment, a comprehensive welfare state and friendship with the victorious Soviet Union. Orders for the daily worker soared to 500,000, but the authorities rationed paper supplies to less than 1/5 of the demand.
From 1930 until then, the Daily Worker was owned and published by the Communist Party of Great Britain. It was an organ of the party. But in the post-war euphoria of a Labour government and setting up the welfare state and so on, it was decided to establish a cooperative society. It ceased to be an organ of the party and it became owned effectively by its readers, its shareholders.
This was one in 1948 when we had a new printing press. This was in the old building in Farringdon Road where there were 20,000 people there to welcome the printing of the Daily Worker on its own press.
The very first edition was thrown out to the crowds who filled the square, the massive torchlight procession where Bill Rust was carried on the crowd, thousands strong, by torchlight from this building. They called it the chairing of the editor. Sounds a bit public school to us today, but that's the way they did it. And they carried him in triumph with the first editions of the paper just after the war, right over to the building in Farringdon.
Because we've suffered from boycotts, bannings, people have attempted to drive us off the street, refused to print us, etc., etc., etc. And so that the history has always been the determination of our readers and supporters to keep the Morning Star going.
The Daily Worker's relationship with the Communist Party continued, but now as a political rather than as an organisational one. The paper still drew insight and inspiration from the ideas of Lenin and Marx. As the Labour government turned right, the Daily Worker supported workers fighting for pay and the right to strike, and opposed Britain's Cold War alliance with American imperialism. The election of Phil Paratin to join Willie Gallagher in Parliament lent a new cutting edge to the paper's political coverage. From 1951, the Daily Worker based its editorial line on the Communist Party's programme, The British Road to Socialism. It is a relationship which endures. The programme's broad approach, combined with the paper's independence, enabled the Daily Worker to win new friends and allies on the left. But at the Soviet Communist Party Congress in 1956, revelations about the crimes of the Stalin period sent a shockwave through the international communist movement. Debate also raged among journalists and printers at the Daily Worker. Months later, Warsaw Pact forces were deployed to maintain communist rule in Hungary. Daily Worker correspondents in Budapest were divided on the intervention, and some staff quit the paper over its pro-Soviet policy. There were no such divisions over support for national liberation struggles against British imperialism. The Daily Worker caused a worldwide sensation with its pictures of British soldiers displaying the severed heads of Malayan freedom fighters. Renamed the Morning Star in 1966, the paper consistently opposed the European common market, which it identified as a club for big business and the rich. And in the great battles of the 1970s and 1980s, the Morning Star stood by workers fighting for jobs, union rights, higher wages and equal pay for women. The Morning Star engages in a daily battle of ideas against those of the monopoly press. The Star's owners are its readers and their progressive political and trade union organisations, and they expect a quality paper in appearance as well as content.
We have a lay elected management committee with a small appointed trade union component with representatives from the Fire Brigade Union, RMT and Unite. The management committee meets once every 2 months, and it is like the board of directors, but it obtains its brief from the shareholders to whom it reports every year.
The shareholders don't receive a dividend, but they do elect the paper's management committee and influence its political direction.
It's not set up to make money, not to make a surplus, not to make a profit, which is the rationale behind most of the other national, regional and local newspapers, who incidentally are getting more and more concentrated in their ownership. Fewer and fewer operators run our media, both at regional, local and national level. The Morning Star is much more open, and what we should be looking for today is actually more models like the Morning Star to run our media, whether it's at local or regional or even national level.
But there's only one sure way to keep the Morning Star shining brightly, and that is to buy the paper every day and persuade others to do likewise.
All right, Morning Star, please. Certainly. These £60, please. Okay. Cheers, mate. Thank you very much. Thanks.
It's become increasingly difficult for small titles to get into the newsagents, and with the concentration of ownership in the media, we've also had what you might call a concentration of distribution.
The problems with newspaper distribution goes right back to Murdoch and Wapping, because in response to the attempted boycott of Murdoch titles, he then set up his own distribution network, TNT, which broke the monopoly, or that was actually a plurality of those doing distribution, added to which the Royal Mail then stopped doing the mail trains and the mail planes, which also took the minor titles, which go from the Daily Jang to the Morning Star to Private Eye.
It can be obtained by a newsagent as easily as the Sun or the Guardian or the Daily Mail. It's just that that's the way the trade operates, that they apply a different rule to the Morning Star than they do to the rest of the press.
There are still a tendency that if a paper doesn't sell, for a couple of days, then the wholesalers will chop it off. And what we really would appreciate would be giving the Morning Star a chance to sell by holding papers in the shops and seeing if there is a market for it. We believe that there is.
The fact of the matter is we have proved in many local branches of Tesco, Sainsbury's, Waitrose and so on, that once the paper's there, their customers will buy it. And so that policy is softening. We survive on circulation income and on money raised from advertising and our fundraisers. We've got a network of readers and supporters groups all around the country. And, that's what sustains us.
Because it will always be hard for a smaller publication like the Star, if it has to rely on major distribution networks who aren't basically that friendly to what the Star stands for, to go distribute it in a proper way. It's obviously why the support groups are a big part of making sure that the paper is stocked and we do get it distributed and placed in places where people can buy it.
Even the Morning Star's printers read it in their spare time, when the presses break down.
You can't blame the workers here because, they're doing their very best, but the machine keeps buggering about. What can they do?
We're on such tight time scale, he's got to get to Manchester by 10:30 at the very latest. He's going to be hard put to do it, isn't he? So the machine just keeps breaking down. Very frustrating. We've got to be away at 7, not 7:15 or 7:20, but 7 o'clock at the latest. Here, I think it comes now. I see something coming down.
Without advertising revenue from big business, all the other national dailies would collapse tomorrow.
But this is the advertising suite here.
Hello, advertising.
We don't get any commercial advertising, or very little commercial advertising, so the bulk of our advertising comes from the trade union movement when they're celebrating things like Toll Puddle or May Day and things like that.
We're not slaves to the advertisers really, because we haven't got all the big advertisers. They refuse to deal with us, so we have to fight our own way, fight our own corner. But then we're not beholden to any big advertiser, you know.
Most of our national newspapers have very little interest in what readers say, and basically they see their publications as delivering readers to advertisers. The Morning Star is not a newspaper that delivers readers to advertisers.
Until Ken Livingstone became the Mayor of London, we never got any advertising from any state organisation until Ken Livingstone was the Mayor. Needless to say, what's the very first thing that Boris Johnson does is he ends all that when he becomes the Mayor.
In July 2008, a fire destroyed the Morning Star's newsroom. Yet still the paper came out the very next day as usual.
Well, the thinking behind the relaunch was clear. One, we had the fire, which wrecked our equipment. We had to put in new technology, which meant we had to put in new programmes. We had to put in new programmes, which meant we had a further set of abilities. We could do more. We could make better use of colour. We could make better use of pictures. We had the Springboard project, which came in and offered us the chance to produce a brighter and better newspaper. And basically the other part of the thinking is that if we don't build the circulation, we die.
We're known worldwide as a daily miracle. We've got no resources, we're the only daily paper without the backing of a multinational company that invests billions. If you look at the new printing process of The Guardian, for example, it cost over, I think, nearly £30 million to set that up. Well, that kind of resource is not over to the Morning Star. And everybody expected us to stop publishing years ago, but we're still here.
The newspaper isn't going away. The cause doesn't go away. The cause of working people is never solved. It just moves on to different levels. We have to adapt to those different levels. We have a website which is now acknowledged to be one of the best newspaper websites. Whether we can continue that will depend obviously on finance, because it doesn't generate money in the same way that, say, a commercial newspaper would do. We're adapting to the 21st century, we're adapting to the problems that working people face and the huge changes in communication.
I think it's the only forum on the left for all these different strands of progressive opinion to come together. To that extent it is unifying in that it provides a platform for an expression of opinion on the left.
The editor and the staff have their own views, but it is not sectarian. It does not denounce other people for not being with the editorial line automatically, and I think that's the most important thing to do.
We feel that the Morning Star has a role in our national political life that is filled by absolutely no other organ, and so it's vitally important to support it, to make sure more people know about it, and so people can find out the truth behind the facade, frankly, which is what normally gets reported by most of the media in Britain today.
The only voice that we've got in the workplace on a day-to-day basis of a newspaper is the Morning Star. We don't always agree with the Morning Star's policies, and we don't expect the Morning Star to agree with all the RMT's policies. But it's the only vehicle on a daily basis that puts our views up and other people's views about making life better for working men and women.
I think that the trade union movement widely supports the Morning Star, probably more than any political party. So as far as I'm concerned, it's a paper that reflects trade unionists' viewpoint to trade unionists.
I've been a daily reader of the Star, virtually every day, because when I come back from holiday I read the back issues. For the best part of 40 years, that's a very, very long time. From my earliest days as a teenager until now, through all the vicissitudes of my political life, the Star has been a kind of anchor for me, and I've never strayed very far from its political line. It's the only daily paper on the left. It is the repository of the best part of a century of political experience. Some mistakes, some big mistakes, but learning, I hope, from those mistakes. And definitely there is no one with the kind of experience that the tradition of the Morning Star has. So I hope that the Morning Star will play a central, if not the leading role in the reassembly of the forces of the left.
It's very, very difficult for people on the left to get access to the mainstream media. So in that respect, the Morning Star is incredibly valuable. It's incredibly important that it continues. It's survived for many, many years, and it's still surviving today, and I personally support it in its drive to become a bigger, broader and more important paper in the future.
The Morning Star is one of the finest achievements of the Labour, Socialist and Communist movement in Britain. It's our paper, it's your paper. Buy it, sell it, take a share in its future, and use it in the struggle for peace and socialism.
The Morning Star ultimately is on the side of people who are fighting to improve their living standards, campaigning for peace, fighting for a better society. The Morning Star is in solidarity with those struggles, and so what we need is more solidarity from the people engaged in those struggles with the Morning Star. And the best way of showing that is to read the paper and make use of the paper every day.
Keep buying the paper, contribute to the paper. By that I mean, if you're a campaigning organisation, send your news stories in, use the letters column to promote ideas and debate, but just keep the paper going and increase the democracy within the governing body of it, so that there can be good feedback between readers and what you might term owners.
The only way the newspaper can survive is on the basis of people become shareholders, they have a say, actually own a newspaper for working people. And I would say to any progressive worker, whether they're in employment or unemployed, and can afford some spare cash, is to buy some shares in the Morning Star.
If I go around to union conferences and sell the Morning Star, particularly at the TUC, people say I must get it daily. And thank goodness it is now available in slightly more outlets so that they are able to. But you know, I mean, the Morning Star is not just for a conference. It's like dogs. They're not just for Christmas or a pet. They're for the whole of the year. So I mean, my message: if you buy the Morning Star one day, buy it the rest of the year.